and that recording will be available in a few days after the conclusion of this program, as are the first three in the series on our YouTube channel. And if you've registered for this event, Megan Akers will be sending you a link directly via email. But welcome to this, our final session of our 4-part advocacy series. We're so glad you are here. I'm Jane Field, Executive Director of the Maine Council of Churches. We are an ecumenical partnership of 7 Protestant denominations whose roots are in Hebrew and Christian scriptures, and that includes the Episcopal, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Quaker, Unitarian Universalist, United Church of Christ, and United Methodist denominations. And here in Maine, those denominations have 437 congregations with about 55,000 members. Our mission as a council is to inspire those congregations and also individuals to unite in building a culture of justice, compassion, and peace. And now a word from our sponsors, as they say. We'd like to thank MaineShare. We are a proud member organization and appreciate the consistent and unrestricted funding that we get from them each and every year. If you are part of a workplace that does a giving campaign with MaineShare, you can designate your gift to come directly to us or to go to the undesignated pool, which is shared by more than 40 members, including the Maine Council of Churches. We'd also like to thank the Synod of the Northeast of the Presbyterian Church USA, who gave us a generous grant to help offset some of the administrative costs associated with this series. I'd also like to thank the members of our planning committee. They worked tirelessly for this series. They were 5 members of our board of directors, including Evelyn Johnson-Moore, who is also our co-chair of our public policy committee, Carolyn Lambert, our vice president, Alan Ewing-Merrill, Marge Kilkelly, and Mike Seavey. And joining them was Izzy Ostrowski, who is from our trusted partner organization, Preble Street Faith Advocacy Network. Running our registration platform, our database, all our communications, and helping to run tech tonight is our fearless and intrepid office administrator, Megan Akers. We are grateful to all of you. Now tonight, we are honored to have 3 former state legislators joining us to offer insight and inside information about what it's like to be on the receiving end of advocacy efforts, whether it's via testimony during a committee hearing or through written communication or during town halls or maybe one-on-one meetings. The first guest I'd like to welcome into the spotlight is Cush Anthony. Cush served in Maine's House of Representatives from 1986 to 1992, where he served as chair of the Judiciary Committee and also served on the Criminal Justice and State and Local Government Committees. Cush is an attorney who specializes as a mediator, and he's a well-known advocate for criminal justice reform, prisoner rights and prisoner reentry, and for restorative justice programs. He's a member of our board of directors, and he attends the Durham meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, otherwise known as Quakers. The next guest I'd like to introduce to you tonight is Dick Farnsworth. Dick Farnsworth served in the Maine House from 1996 to 1998, took a break, and then was back from 2012 to 2020. He was chair of the Health and Human Services Committee and also served on the Business and Economic Development and Education Committees. Before his career in teaching and nonprofit management, Dick actually attended seminary and was ordained as a United Methodist pastor. Currently, he worships at St. Luke's Episcopal Cathedral in Portland, reminding us yesterday that John Wesley never thought he was anything but Church of England, so it's entirely fitting that a Methodist be going to an Episcopal church. Finally, I'd like to reintroduce to you Marge Kilkelly. She's already familiar to you. She's been a presenter for sessions 2 and 3 of this series. She served in the Maine House of Representatives from 1986 to 1996, and then in the state Senate from 1997 to 2002. Her committee assignments included state and local government, education, economic development, agriculture, and fish and wildlife, where she served as chair. She went on to work for the State Council of Governments and then as a senior policy advisor to Senator Angus King in Washington, D.C. Right now, as you know, she works as a policy program manager at the Maine Primary Care Association. And she and her husband also run Dragonfly Cove Farm in Dresden, which explains the goats you can see in the background behind her. She's a member of Christ Church Episcopal in Gardner and also serves on our board of directors. So welcome to all three of you, and thank you so much for being here tonight. I'll invite the three of you to unmute so that everyone can hear. We had a great conversation, the four of us yesterday, and I told them, just because you said it to me yesterday, don't forget to say it again tonight, because I want you all to hear this incredible back and forth and exchange of experience and ideas that they have. I thought we'd start tonight by spending a few minutes talking about the three of you and your time serving in the legislature. So I'm just going to throw out some things, and then I know you'll have plenty to talk about based on your experiences while you were serving the legislature. Think about these things and then talk to us. What's it like to hear from constituents or not hear from them? A very wise legislator once said, representative democracy is a shared responsibility. It's not finished when you vote, it starts when you vote. So you can respond to that. Is it important for a legislator to hear from advocates? And if so, why? And is it true that maybe legislators might even depend on us advocates for information? Tonight, we're hoping that Marge will solve the mystery of what longitudinal ruts in highways are. But with that said, Marge, Dick, Kush, who would like to jump in and talk about what it's like to interface with constituents and advocates when you're serving in the legislature?
Well, I go back farther, so I probably ought to start.
Okay, good.
I served from 1986 to 1992, before emails, before this technology that we're appreciating tonight. I found that I did not hear. I was living in South Portland. I represented one part of the city of South Portland. I seldom heard from people about legislation, except a few bills that I heard a lot about, especially gun control bills.
Yes.
But that, I think that relates to the fact that it was back then, and also to the fact that I came from an urban environment, decidedly urban. I know that people from rural areas, such as Marge and to some degree Dick, heard more from their constituents than I did.
Yeah, I was
go
in
ahead.
118th, and which was before the internet and all that sort of thing. And then I came into the 126th, and it was the difference of night and day in terms of the amount of communication that I got via email. Kush is right. If I got 3 letters about something, I would consider it to be a major issue prior to that. But with the emails, sometimes I would come home at night and there would be 75 or 80 emails waiting from constituents to basically want to know what I'm thinking about this issue, that issue, some of which I knew something about and many of which I did not, which is always one of those challenging kinds of things. But so a quote that I could use is, I'll find out about that and get back to you.
Good quote. Very handy. So you faith-based advocates, if you have a legislator say that to you, you know that they need to go find out, because yesterday these three told me you aren't elected knowing about 3,000 different areas that you suddenly are supposed to know about with all the bills that come before you. So
Hence, we end up at longitudinal ruts and highways.
what the heck are those? Marge said she had to figure out what those were because it kept coming up in one of her committees.
But it was actually on the floor in the House, and I've used it often as an example of the fact that legislators have to vote on issues that they don't know about. And if it's something that's important to you, you have an obligation, as far as I'm concerned, to share that information if it's something that's really important. And I just remember sitting listening to this whole debate about longitudinal ruts, and there were people saying, oh, the trucks are too heavy and they're causing ruts in the road, and when you drive down the road it's like being on a train track because of the ruts. And other people going, well, if the trucks aren't heavy enough, or if they're too heavy, then it's going to hurt business. You hear all that stuff. But what's really wonderful is when you can go back to something a constituent has told you about why this issue is important. And to Dick's point about not knowing every bill, another one of my stories, I'm a story person. I had a guy call me one night and he said very gruffly, what are you going to do about LD 1246? And I said, well, what's the title? And he said, what do you mean you don't know the title? That's what we send you up there for. How come you don't know that? Blah, blah, blah. And I said, whoa, 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 sir. I said, think about this. It's LD 1276. That means that there are at least 1,275 other pieces of legislation.
That's right.
So if you tell me the title, I will see if it's something I know about. And thank you, God, it was. Because it was like, oh no. But it was, and I was able to sort of talk him off the ledge. But I mean, don't have ridiculous expectations that, again, because something's critically important to you, that your legislator has heard about it, that they know about it, that they're well versed on the topic. That's why we have committees. The Transportation Committee worked on longitudinal ruts. I didn't. And I needed to depend on that debate and that information to make a decision. And again, Jane's point, I mean, voting is the start. Representative democracy is in fact a participating sport. I mean, you can't just sit back and assume that legislation is going to happen in a way that you want it to because you want it to. It's going to happen that way because you've been involved and you've taken responsibility for those decisions that government is making by trying to influence it as much as you can.
Sometimes you get placed on the committee you didn't ask for too. And that can, yes. I had a background in human services and education and all those kinds of good touchy-feely things. And when I was in the 118th, Libby Mitchell appointed me to the Business and Economic Development Committee. And I kept saying, what happened? So one time when it was in an informal kind of a setting, I was talking with Libby and I said, why did you appoint me to the Business and Economic Development Committee? And she said, didn't you ask for that? And I said, no. I had either education or health and human services. And she thought for a while and she said, I think I screwed up.
Oh.
Now, that's a good sign when somebody in that position can sort of admit that they may have made a mistake. But when being in that committee, I can't tell you how much I learned about the business community. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Yeah. So even though you may not necessarily have that as your primary focus of your life, you can use it as an incredible opportunity to learn. One example, we had, we're discussing interpreters for the deaf. Okay, a very important issue, especially in our current society where we're trying to broaden people's access to information and so on. And we had lots and lots of testimony about, do we license them or how do we handle this whole thing? And the amount that I learned, even though I had a background in working with people with disabilities, the amount that I learned about the deaf community was phenomenal. And it has literally changed my whole way of looking at that particular community. So it really is a tremendous learning experience in that respect.
Since we're pointing out errors, I want to point out that Jane made an error. I was not chair of judiciary. I was chair of criminal justice,
Criminal justice. I couldn't tell from my handwriting which one, so I guessed.
but I was on both committees, so
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Kush.
the the Judiciary Committee was filled with lawyers.
How about?
So
Criminal-
speaking of committee appointments, on my last term in the House, I was offered one of two committees. I could either chair the Agriculture Committee or I could chair Banking and Insurance. And I didn't hesitate for a minute and said Agriculture. And there was this whole whisper thing going on after the committee chairs were announced, and people were coming over and saying, what did you do to make the speaker mad that you didn't get, the banking, because it was considered a plum? And I said, oh, I'll take plaid shirts any day over suits.
Yep.
So it's really, how people choose their committees is often based on things that they care about, but you don't always get those choices. And what some think of as, again, sort of the plum things, or others would think of as, oh my God, I don't think I could live through it. And that would be insurance.
I think many people did not understand why in the world I applied to be on the Corrections Committee. It was then called the Select Committee on Corrections, the Criminal Justice Committee, because it was filled with a large number of police officers and some corrections people, but I cared deeply about what are we doing with people when we put them in prison.
Yeah.
Because I was involved in the criminal justice system and I represented people who ended up going in prison, and I kept seeing they went to prison, they never got anything, they never got any help. They came out as bad off as they were when they went in. Now, thankfully, I think it's a little better now, but not really. And in fact, I am in touch with a guy at the Maine State Prison who tells me that with all these COVID issues and financial problems, they pretty much eliminated programs up there. So he has me trying to contact people I know in leadership to get a bill submitted to increase the funding for the correction system.
And
What do they
Kush
say?
is-
Idle hands and idle minds make for dangerous children.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And Kush continues his commitment to that by being our liaison to the Maine Prisoner Advocacy Coalition and keeping our Public Policy Committee informed about bills that are coming before the legislature, other issues that are affecting prisoners, people that are incarcerated here in Maine.
It's so important. We take these people, we lock them up, and then at a later point, we let them out. Now, what are they going to be like when they are let out? Unless they've gotten some effective work done with them to help them correct some of the ways that their thinking process, or get educated, or get off drugs. I mean, all that stuff is so important because otherwise we've just made things worse, not better.
I want to go back a little bit to the whole issue of communicating. And I will say that listening to my former colleagues and, not getting lots of calls, my kids stopped going to the grocery store with me shortly after I got elected, because the grocery store was a 2-hour adventure for a gallon of milk, because everybody stopped. And it was great. I loved it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, being in the legislature is the best job in the world. And if it wasn't for term limits, constituents willing, I'd still be in the House. But it's the best job ever. And it gives you an opportunity to be a voice for people in many cases who have no voice in the process. And that's a gift. I mean, that really is a gift. But one of the things that is really important when you're doing that communicating, especially around a piece of legislation, is to explain why. Don't just call a legislator and say, that bill is stupid and shouldn't pass, blah, blah, blah. Explain why. That bill is going to hurt my business because, that bill is going to hurt my farm because, or maybe it's a positive thing. I hope you'll pass this piece of legislation because we're dealing with this issue and this will solve it. make those last sentences happen, because otherwise, you don't know what to do. And I know when I was in Washington, I would constantly say that to people. Tell me what the problem is, why this is part of it, and what we ought to do, because you don't want people who aren't experienced in what you're talking about make all the decision without good information. And so when you're explaining why something is good or why something is bad, it really gives a depth of knowledge to that person, so that when they are making the decision, whether it's as a staff person on the Hill or making that decision as a member, that decision is going to be better. And so, really be thoughtful about it, make it succinct. No one has time to read lots and lots and lots of information unless it's something that they're studying specifically. But beyond that, it really is important to just explain why, and offer to be a resource. So when the legislator says, gosh, I don't know about that, say, well, I can help you find such and such. We don't have staff. Like when I was in the House, I had 1/8 of a staff person. It's probably not much different than that now. When I was in the Senate, I had 1/5 of a staff person. And so, it's a lot of, mom answered the phone. My mother lived with us. She answered the phone. The kids learned how to answer the phone, and never say, yes, I'm sure mom would think that's a good idea. That was very bad. Yeah. My mother did that once, and we had a long tutorial in the family about how to answer the phone.
One other thing that I think is implied in all this, don't speak in generality, speak about your own personal experience. Give examples, because we up there, we hear all the generalities, but it's really useful to have a specific that we can point to and say, this is what happens if.
Right.
And it gives us an opportunity to, when we are either testifying or we're in committee or in discussions with our colleagues, to say, one of my constituents came up and went down the list like this, and really it's a very convincing argument.
And what about your experiences during your times in the legislature with people who were specifically faith-based in the advocacy they were doing? What were things you experienced that were effective, that weren't effective? Were there silences that you wished there had been voices speaking, or were there voices only speaking on one side? What was that like for you?
Well, I can tell you the Criminal Justice Committee heard from pastoral voices a lot, from the Maine Council of Churches, actually, way back then. And it was really important, because it was a balance against the stuff I was hearing from the law enforcement folks.
We have, being on Education Committee was a real challenge, because we had the vaccination bill. And we had, I think, 100 and some odd people testified on that. Many of them based upon their interpretation of their faith, and likewise that are against it, and those who were very much for it. And it really was a challenge to kind of sort out exactly the level of sincerity, and then also to figure out, are people sort of just bringing their own personal approach to this, or is there really a foundation for what they're talking about? But that was a real challenge that we had to sort that one out.
Yeah, I remember that one, Dick.
Yeah, I think it's critically important for those of us who are center, left of center Christians, if you will, to talk about our faith. And I think it's more uncomfortable for us than it is for folks on the right. And they're very loud, and they're very clear, and they're always feeling very correct. And that can be intimidating. And it can also, I think it sort of, I think, causes some of us to just be quieter. And what concerns me about that is when there isn't that balance in public policy, there's an assumption that all Christians feel a particular way, or that's the voice that's heard, that's the loud voice. And it's less of an issue for those of us who are gathered around this Zoom room because we know better. But what about the people who are unchurched? What about the people who really don't have a faith base for themselves, and that's what they're hearing? And they're making a judgment about their own faith based on, or their lack or challenges of faith, based on what they're hearing, which is not how we feel. And so I think it's important for individuals to be able to make choices, but to have information. And I feel like, again, our obligation in the course of public commentary is to make sure that a variety of Christian perspectives are out there. And when, again, I think it's harder for us. You just have to kind of brace yourself and start talking about faith. And many of us find that a bit of a challenge. But I think it's critically important.
I remember Marge spoke at Bishop Stephen Lane's retirement event and talked about the first time she got brave enough to say on a panel with someone who was very right wing, Christian civically kind of talking and saying, this is what Christianity says, and being able to say, actually, I'm a Christian and I go to church and I don't see it that way at all. And, here's a different way of looking at that.
Yeah, what I heard that night was that person saying, before every answer as a Christian. And it occurred to me that I could say the same thing. And I'll tell you, it made that other person very uncomfortable, which was delightful. But it also put out there that there are different ways that Christians can look at things.
Absolutely.
I can't leave this conversation without at least acknowledging, I see Suzanne Rudalevich is one of the participants here. She was the person representing the Maine Council of Churches back when I was in the legislature. And did a great job.
Welcome, Suzanne. It's nice to have you here. I do see a question in the chat box from none other than the president of the Maine Council of Churches. Lodewick says she has a question about communication with legislators. With the rise of electronic communications and social media, it's so easy to communicate with government officials. I get so many requests from advocacy organizations asking me to sign petitions or send letters to my legislators. These organizations often provide text for me to cut and paste. Whoops, sorry, I just lost that. It just popped back up to the top of my chat box. There it is. Are these sorts of letters effective, or is it simply annoying for legislators to receive gazillions of form letters that say pretty much the exact same thing? What do you guys have to say about that?
When the count gets above 5, I start to just stack them up and not worry about it.
It's nice to know that there's strong opinions and that a lot of people feel that way, but sending the same text over and over from different people is not effective at all. In fact, I think it's off-putting.
Well, and I think the other thing is that when those pieces are written for you to stick your name in, they're written from the perspective specifically of that particular advocacy group, and it may not be really reflective of some of the ways that you feel about things. And I would encourage people, if somebody sends you something like that, send a couple of sentences, send a something brief to your legislator and say, I really am concerned about this, and I know that the XYZ group is working on it. But I just, both in DC and when I was in DC, we'd get about 5,000 pieces of communication on an average week.
Good Lord.
And so, it's challenging.
That is an interesting thing that I want to go back a little bit to what Jane had asked about earlier, and that's the advocacy as opposed to the lobbyist piece.
Yeah.
And, my feeling is that lobbyists are valuable in terms of they present some information. The trick is you have to be able to sort it out and make sure that what they're telling you is accurate. And if it isn't, then, you know, you can slough it off. However, advocacy from citizens is a different kind of an issue. And, you know, if they're sincere and they email you, or they call you on the phone, or they catch you in the aisle at Hannaford's in Forest Avenue, then it gives you an opportunity to actually have some communication with people. And that's the real delightful part. Lobbyists are there. They're going to buttonhole you. And you can listen to them, or you can say, I don't have time right now. I have a committee meeting, or, you know, we're about ready to go into session. There's all kinds of really good dodges. But, nonetheless, they do offer a certain kind of information. Some people have said that term limits have increased the impact of lobbyists. And I'm inclined to think that that may be the case. But
Yeah.
so I rely on them, I used to rely on them for what they said, but sort it out. But when it comes to people like you, who are talking to me and communicating with me about stuff, it's serious business, and I will take it to heart.
And in
I
the
think-
faith-based world, we are going to move on to Evelyn, who's waiting in the wings for her moment in the spotlight. But just so all our participants understand, in the faith-based world in Maine legislature right now, the Christian Civic League and the Roman Catholic Diocese have paid lobbyists. We
Yeah.
at the Maine Council of Churches are not lobbyists. We are a 501c3, not a 501c4. And we only do the kind of advocacy that Dick just described. We are not paid lobbyists. So there's a difference. Usually, although we don't have the resource depth that maybe a paid lobbyist might have. But I see some other great questions coming into the chat, and we're going to circle back to Q&A in a minute. But right now, I'd like us to focus in on one particular advocacy tool, and that's offering testimony before a legislative committee. So Marge and Kush and Dick are going to form a sort of committee for a moment and pretend that they are in a meeting room or a Zoom room right now because of the pandemic. And Evelyn Johnson Moore has come along to the podium to deliver some faith-based testimony on LD 996, which is a bill we heard about last time, the one to expand access to dental care through Maine Care for adults. And she is, God bless her, she is a brave and fearless woman who's going to read some testimony that she and Mike Seavey collaborated on creating. This is real world. I mean, this really is testimony that got presented. And then she's going to get feedback from our panel of legislators about what was effective, what could have been said differently, what worked, what didn't. And then we'll open it up to all of you to imagine what you might have added or said on this bill in a faith-based piece of testimony. So Evelyn, thank you for being our brave and intrepid guinea pig. And I assume that you're following the rules about a 3-minute testimony, which there's always this horrifically frightening countdown clock. Oh, and I see that one of our participants, Patty Kidder from Springvale, who actually used to put gas in my dad's boat in the 1960s, because Maine is a small town with long streets. She actually testified on this bill yesterday, and there may be others in the room who did as well. So there is a clock that counts down, and when you're in person in a legislative committee room, it's right in front of your face, and it begins counting down from 3 minutes as soon as you start talking. It can really be distracting and a little intimidating, but Evelyn's just going to imagine that clock is going, and thank you for being here, Evelyn, and whenever you're ready, welcome to the Legislative Committee.
Well, thank you, Representative Kilkelly, Anthony, and Farnsworth, and members of the Health and Human Service Committee. My name is Evelyn Johnson Moore. I am a United Methodist who lives in Wells, and I co-chair the Public Policy Committee of the Maine Council of Churches, which supports LD 996. The Maine Council of Churches represents 7 denominations statewide, which includes 437 churches. Although our faith expressions can differ, we stand united that the dignity of the human person shapes the foundation for our public policy positions. We unanimously hold that healthcare is a human right, and we have a responsibility to advocate for those who are excluded from accessing that care. So for too long, dental care has been considered extraneous to basic health care. But common sense tells us that care for teeth and gums has significant impact on the rest of our bodies. Our coalition partners on this legislation have identified important research on the impact that lack of dental care has on total physical health. We also witness this impact on families and households in our congregations and in the communities where churches and worship sites are located. When poor people have no access for dental service, treatable illnesses are neglected, often deteriorating into more serious diseases accompanied by infection. Hospital emergency rooms then become their only option with more expensive treatments and at times irreversible damage. Missing or damaged teeth also present an unnecessary hurdle to getting hired for a job. Employers are understandably hesitant to hire someone with visible oral diseases, but so many with serious dental issues are even too embarrassed to apply for a job in the first place. Removing such barriers helps move people into good paying jobs and better able to provide for their family needs. Obviously, this is also greatly impacts self-confidence and self-esteem. Reducing emergency room visits and increasing the pool of eligible workers are only two positive outcomes from this legislation. Access to proper dental care reduces stress and anxiety of living with constant pain. The sense of isolation brought on by constant pain and embarrassment also melts away, allowing folks to become more a part of the community. This benefits everyone in the municipality where they live and becomes good for our state. We strongly support LD 996 and urge this committee to report ought to pass to the Senate and the House of Representatives. Thank you for your work promoting the healthcare and well-being of Maine people. And I'll gladly take any questions.
I have a question.
Yes, Kush.
Is there
Representative.
research that demonstrates what happens if you don't get dental care?
Yes, there is. And I believe that you'll be hearing from people as the day goes on. There's research for people with diabetes, for instance, and the amount of money that will be saved just by providing dental care for folks who have diabetes who are at this point unable to get that. But yes, and I would be glad if you don't hear from people today, which I think you will, I'd be glad to get you that information.
And that's important too, because it's going to cost the state a lot of money to provide this. And so from my point of view, I want to make sure that we're actually saving money by passing this and not increasing the drag on the state budget.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do we have a fiscal note on this? How much it's going to cost?
Yes, I have no idea.
You have no idea. Okay.
Do we?
Then
That
would
is
be
a good question. And I need to say that I do not know the answer to that. When you say a
That's-
fiscal,
Fiscal
Fiscal
note.
note, yeah.
Necessarily, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
sort of inside language, but no, I would ask our clerk to find out if we have a fiscal note on that, in that case, since you don't have that information.
And Evelyn is demonstrating for all of you what to do if people ask questions you don't know the answer to. A, don't make stuff up. That's never a good idea. B, it is perfectly okay to say there are others testifying here today who have access to that information, because our partner organizations, like where Marge works, Maine Primary Care Association, will come up they will go into the weeds with statistics and numbers and financial impact. And you as a faith-based advocate aren't there to do that. So it's okay to stay at, my daughter has a saying, pick a lane. It's okay to stay in your lane. And your lane is this impacts people's well-being on a spiritual, emotional, and physical plane. And that's why we care about it at the Maine Council of Churches, or that's why I care about it as a person of faith. It's really okay to say, I don't know.
And I was going to say that, given these boundaries of 3 minutes, it's even more important to stay in your lane. And that, being able to reference and say there's someone else who's got that information also shows that people are working together. And I think it shows a level of support for the legislation that goes, across a number of areas and makes a lot of sense. And it also, is not going to detract or not detract, but take time away from your testimony. I think just on a couple of pieces that are just really important, if you're doing this for the first time, it's really good to just start off with who you are and that you're supporting something or you're opposing it, or, you've got concerns or whatever. And just sort of start there, and then people, sort of can slide into some of the things that you're saying and describing the organization. I mean, I can see some people on a committee going, well, I didn't know that, there were, that many churches that were coalesced around these issues. That's really impressive. I bet there are some in my, in my district that are involved in this. And I think, whenever you can bring something home to folks, that's really important. And so I just wanted to say, I just felt the way the testimony was laid out was very well done, but also the fact that, not using your time to repeat something. The other piece, if you get up there and you're the 5th or 6th person to speak, and somebody's already said a lot of what you're going to say, then, find a way to just, say, I support what they were talking about. And then you can go off and maybe talk a little bit more. I know when I testified this year on a couple of bills, I wrote my testimony. It was longer than 3 minutes because I can barely introduce myself in 3 minutes, according to my husband. And so, but what I did was I highlighted the parts I wanted to make sure I said. Now, if someone had already made those points, I could have gone into something else. But I think it's good practice to know that members are going to get that written testimony. The committee staff is going to get that testimony, and they'll be able to incorporate it into their analysis of the bill. And you can, you don't have to read every single thing that you've put on there because you're probably not going to have time.
And you don't have to talk for 3.
Our committee chair used to basically advise people, especially if we had a lot of people that wanted to testify, saying, if somebody else has already said what you want to say, it's okay for you to say, here's what they said in summary, and we agree with that. Easy enough.
Good. These are all helpful hints.
I'd also point out that having written summary of what you're saying is important, because when you're speaking to this committee, the whole committee probably is not going to be there. Legislators have multiple obligations, sometimes to other committees, sometimes because they're introducing a bill elsewhere, sometimes because they have set up a meeting with constituents. And so being able, from a legislator's point of view, being able to see what was said by you when you were there is going to be very helpful.
And
we have a class from Casco Bay High School that's come down, and they want to have you meet with them, and they set their time not according to what's happening. So yeah, really, it can be a very interesting challenge.
And I see Alan is asking a question, which is a pre-COVID question, and hopefully we will be back to these days again. But when you go in person, you are asked to bring 20 paper copies of your testimony. And then you hand that to the clerk as you begin. And in these COVID days, you are asked to submit online. So your document needs to be in by a certain deadline. And so they have it in writing, virtual writing as well. And in part, that's because of what Kush just said. And don't take it personally if people get up and walk out while you're talking. It's because of all those reasons he just listed. And later they can read what you said. So it's very important that it is submitted in writing. You can also submit in writing without doing it verbally.
Right.
That's another option you have. In a minute, we're going to talk about people who are nervous about public speaking. As you all, I'm sure, have seen many studies, people are more afraid of public speaking than deaf. So in a little bit, we'll talk about tips and techniques for managing that if you think, oh my gosh, I don't know if I could do that. But right now I'm interested in, go ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing, when you go to the committee, there are going to be, the committee will be there, the committee members or however many of them are there. But there's also a committee clerk, and that person is responsible for keeping all the papers in order, which is an enormous job. But then there are committee staff, and they're often attorneys or policy experts, and they're sitting and taking notes on the testimony. They're also going to be collecting all that written testimony. So when the legislators come back for a work session, which is when the bill gets discussed by the committee, the staff person has looked at all of that information and basically has put it into a summary form. So that's another reason that it's just really important to have have that written piece there, maybe in a longer than what you would for the 3 minutes that you.
Well, and I'm thinking on this one, because it was being heard on Monday, and because Mike had written it earlier, we got that into them on Friday. So anybody, I was thinking, well, if they have nothing else to do over the weekend, they can start looking at, what's come in and have a chance to at least read it. So that doesn't always work in people's schedules.
We have a question in
Yes,
the chat box.
we need to address that. The question being the tension between the generalities, the big picture stuff, and the individualized examples. It is a tension, and somebody somewhere has to be introducing the big picture stuff. But if you have important information that is detailed based on an experience that you or somebody you know has had, go with that. And trust that somebody else is gonna, that the Maine Council of Churches is gonna come up with some of the data necessary. The data can always be submitted later, of course.
Right. Marge, I had muted you there for a second. There was some weird audio thing going on, but I think it's resolved now.
Oh, okay.
Sort of. It's real. Your audio is coming through kind of distorted.
You sound like there's a helicopter going over.
Maybe there is. I also think it's important to know who the nonprofit, the secular advocacy organizations are that are working on these things. Often Maine Equal Justice will be coordinating, and you should all know that organizations like theirs will produce talking points. They will organize the people who are going to testify and support you and help you. They don't put words in your mouth. They're there to be supportive and to help you understand what's happening. And their talking points are often very, very good. And then you can use those and put the faith-based piece in, which they don't know how to do and are the first ones to say, we need a caller in the room. We need God talk on this, and we don't know how to do that. Mike Seavey just typed, any criticisms of the testimony were the parts written by Evelyn. Mike, Evelyn might.
Let me throw out some other information differentiating between the work session and the regular hearings.
Yes, please
hearings
do.
Is where the committee listens to you and asks questions. We can't get, up and start orating about this or that. We have to only ask questions. But the work session is when we, as a committee, work the bill among ourselves. And while you may be there, you are not allowed to participate unless you are requested to participate by one of the chairs. And that way, it helps control some of the length of time that's required in order to work things through. It's hard enough when you've got 13 members of a committee to work things through, let alone if you throw in a whole bunch of other people from outside.
Mhm.
If you go to a work session and you have something special that you want to make sure gets brought up, you speak to a legislator ahead of time and say, please ask me to address the committee about such and such, because that way you do get a chance to fill in the stuff that you didn't get a chance to say at the public hearing.
But you have to bait the hook.
You have to bait the hook. Words to live by.
But I think if you think about it as the public hearing is time for the public to talk, and legislators are pretty much, no, it's not working. Somebody's-
Yeah, it's still really, oh, shoot.
Oh, well.
Shoot. So I think what Marge was going to say is that the public hearing is where the public talks, but the work session is where the legislators talk.
That's right. Mhm.
And they will sometimes ask experts to be in the room, and we'll ask them questions, and that's great, but it's a flip. There are two sort of flip sides of the same record. So Glennis Elliott is pointing out that Moms Demand Action, which is one of the gun safety organizations in the state, also provides excellent talking points.
Mhm.
There are so many good organizations that, we rely on Environmental Priorities Coalition, for example, on a lot of the climate justice bills to provide background, insight, coordination. And they're not used to the faith community always being trustworthy partners, but they've come to learn the Maine Council of Churches is somebody they can tap, and we aren't, crazy Bible thumpers. We aren't gonna go off topic, we're trustworthy, and they appreciate that. And often the voice of faith can be really pivotal. The example Dick gave of the vaccine bill, as you heard Bonnie present in our very first session, was critically important when it came right down to it, like one vote. It really made a difference. So not to be underestimated. And we rely on our partners to tell us when those moments come. Because there are times when it's going to pass anyway. It's great if people of faith care about it, but it isn't an emergency. And then there are times when it is. Tips and techniques for handling nerves or fear of public speaking. We have a lot of clergy in the room, and they probably have lots of wisdom about that. Some simple things are breathing. If you just stop and breathe deeply from your belly, it will slow you down and it will take that shake out of your voice. Often, I don't know, Kush, Marge, Dick, if you had someone really nervous in front of you, you would say, take a moment. I've seen legislators do that, say it's okay.
Yes.
They'll
We
be.
had on Health and Human Services one time, we had a woman who was wanting to testify and talk about her rape experience. And she told us that she wanted to, and we said, you don't have to, you can submit that as written testimony. Because it can be very difficult and very traumatic. She says, I have to in terms of my own therapy. And so we said, take your time. We will give you the time that you need in order to share your story, because it was a very powerful story. And she got up and did an incredible job. I was just amazed, even as difficult as that story was. But as committee chair at that particular point, we intervened in order to let that person know that it was her option and that we would support her in whatever she chose to do.
Mm.
And I think most of your chairs are pretty sensitive when they see somebody. We've had people come up who said, just literally shaking.
Yes.
And just remember, we put our pants on or dress on, one leg at a time.
Mhm.
And we're just human beings like you are. And so talk to us like we're your neighbor. We try to take and break down the quote, this will sound silly, the aura of being a legislator,
No,
There ain't
people
no
are
aura, folks.
intimidated. Yeah. Eleanor Pryor is telling a very important piece of advice that is part of every wedding
Yes.
rehearsal I've ever run, and that is do not lock your knees while you are standing at the podium because you will faint. And that is not a good thing to have happen. It would make an impression on the legislators, I imagine. Yeah, if you lock in, by locking your knees, she means, backwards straight. So they're sort of backwards straightened. It stops the blood flow and that's why people faint. So don't do that. Wiggle your,
Is my sound working now?
oh, there you go. Hi, Marge. Yes.
I was also going to say, when we get back to in-person testimony, it's okay for somebody to stand beside you. If you really feel like, I really want to do this, this is important for me to do, but I just can't do it by myself, then do that. And I think with Zoom, in some ways it's easier because you could have somebody sitting next to you, hanging onto your hand if you need it, holding your beer. I mean, whatever, just hold my beer, let's do this. But I mean, really, I think it's just important that you have the kind of support that you need in order to say what you need to say. And however that works for you is fine and important.
Please tell me that one of you had a legislative committee meeting where someone walked to the podium and said, "Here, hold my beer," because that would just be great. That I wish. That sounds like a Maine story if ever there was one. I see in the chat that from Preble Street, they will often stand beside and support
Yes.
folks that come forward to talk of their lived world experience. And as Dick said, you can just see trembling. You can see someone physically trembling. But what an impact I would imagine, Marge and Dick and Cush, that would have on you, that someone cared that deeply that no matter how scared they are, they're still going to come. And
in the education committee, we had a lot of kids come up and
Mm.
testify on some of the bills. And for them, it's the first time. And so it really was, a very challenge for them. And we would really reach out and say, just relax, take a deep breath, take your time, settle in, we'll give you the time that you need. And we don't always use a 3-minute clock. Many times if we don't have a lot of people backed up, we don't use the clock at all. So it depends on the bill and how many people we're going to have.
I think
That's actually good. That's good to know because I actually practiced this beforehand for 3 minutes. And when I practiced it, I had 6 seconds left. So I thought, well, that's really not enough. So Mike, I didn't cut out yours, but I did cut out some things. And so that I had more like 15, 20 seconds left. Because, I do know that would be a thing that could be nerve-wracking toward the end, if someone says your time is up, or that for someone speaking, and so I think just being able to say these are my key points, as you said, Marge, too. But I also did, I kept it within that time, just in case you were going to have a little buzzer go off.
And a rule of thumb for folks, probably most people know this, but in case you don't, a double space 12 font typed page with 1-inch margins takes about 2 minutes to read. So that's not a lot of words to get you to your 3 minutes. It always takes longer than you think it will.
And if you're
I used to practice by looking in the microwave. I would just talk to the microwave.
No, if you're writing, have a written testimony, and sometimes you'll take and say what you want, but give them the written. Make sure it's no more than 2 pages.
Ah, good, good.
I think at some point we need to talk about what happens after the testimony, after the work session.
Yep.
Yeah, would you do that? Go ahead, Kush, lead us forward.
Well, the committee votes. And if there's a unanimous vote, one way or another, and sometimes it's unanimous ought to pass, unanimous ought not to pass, or unanimous pass as amended. One of the legislators comes up with an amendment and offers it and people like it. Then it goes sailing through the House and Senate without debate, really. Sometimes you get an almost unanimous with 12 people for and 1 against, and that's because that one person really needs to say something on the floor of the House, but it's pretty much a done deal. On the other hand, there are divided reports, and those are important. What happens to the divided reports? They go to each house, the House and the Senate, each body, and somebody on one side will present that side, and typically then somebody who disagrees with that and voted the other way will stand and present the other point of view. Then that's where another point at which advocacy is really important. You let your representative know ahead of time if that's going to happen and how you want that person to vote, because that's critical.
Yes.
So, and a really good point about that is that it's, from the outside, it's often difficult to understand how it is that people can debate to the death on the floor and then go have dinner together. But it is absolutely essential. And it's essential for you that are going to be going before the legislature, because the person who disagrees with you today, for one thing, may have a really good reason for disagreeing with you, or maybe a number of people in their community, in their district, are in a particular place, but it may be the person who's the champion for the issue the next time up that you're concerned about.
Right.
And so it's really important to be respectful in that process. Now, there are some people that you're never going to agree with and you don't like them, and that's fine, frankly. But 85% of the people are going to land in the middle somewhere, and you're going to need them one day, or they're going to need you and get some information. And so just don't make those harsh decisions about whether somebody is a good legislator or not based on one bill. That's a huge mistake. And one of the things that I was saying at the beginning of this session in particular, before we knew that there was going to be any federal money coming through, is that legislators who were generally very supportive of things we cared about would be faced with very hard decisions that they did not want to make, but had to because of the fiscal constraints. And again, it is so important to listen to people, to ask questions, not just to, go after them because, the post on Facebook that says you're an idiot for having done this, whatever. It's just not helpful, and it's not going to serve you well in the future either.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's about relationships. And speaking of relationships, I want to thank the 3 of you for not only your service to our great state, which we do want to thank you for, but for being willing to spend this time with us tonight and really give us a glimpse behind the scenes and let us pick your brains, because it will make us more effective when we meet with legislators currently serving. And what a valuable thing that I've noticed some chats going along here that people have to leave for other meetings, but wanted you to know how grateful they are to you tonight for what you've shared with us. It's been, I've learned things that I didn't know before tonight. So I want to thank you too. And we're going to shift gears now to a kind of closing, commissioning time. Yes, go ahead, Kush. Yeah.
I'm very involved with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which is a Quaker-based lobby group in Washington. And they have a saying that they give to people. Sometimes it's a pin that says, this is what a lobbyist looks like. Because each of you are going to be lobbyists, unpaid lobbyists for whatever position you're taking. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Mhm,
Indeed.
absolutely.
Yeah. This is a good group that has gathered through this series. It's really heartening and inspiring. So thank you. And now I'd like to say another thank you to Sarah Ewing Merrill. She has designed and led us every session, our worship time, our prayer time, our centering time, including our closing this evening, which brings the whole series to a close. And we'll begin in just a moment. But I'd like to remind everyone, including myself, to mute your microphone so that the audio quality of the music and voices will come through well for you. And Sarah, at this point, I'll turn it over to you with our heartfelt thanks for your leadership throughout these months. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. It is a sacred duty to speak with our voices and to use the power that we have to influence the world and to influence our state and to create the world that we long for. So I'd like to begin tonight's worship with a song called One Voice, because we each have a voice, and that means that we have power, and that when we join our voices together, they are even more powerful. So I invite you to breathe in and breathe out and to reflect on the voice that you have.
This is the sound of one voice, one spirit.
Hear these words from Stephen Charleston, retired bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Alaska, an elder in the Choctaw Nation. It is so good to see you smile. After all these many months, after such a long struggle, it is good to see hope rewarded in the language of smiles.
To emerge on high ground, to be able to breathe, to feel that there's a fighting chance for tomorrow. The relief is real.
It is a gift of the Spirit to all those who kept believing and kept moving forward day by day, sometimes moment by moment, walking with courage when things seemed hopeless, walking in faith during the darkest hours.
Now we come to this place of new beginnings, ready to do the work that must be done, ready to make the changes that must be made.
The great challenges ahead will not be easy.
We're still facing a host of old issues, and we'll surely discover more along the way.
But before we begin that next part of our journey, let me just say to all of us,
It is so good to see you smile.
Thank you. It is good to see you smile. The scripture that I have to share with you tonight is a story of advocacy, is a word of challenge from God to Ezekiel to say truth to power, even when we're not sure what the effects of that truth telling might be. Hear these words. If I have a message for the wicked king, and you don't warn him to change his ways, then he will surely perish because of his wickedness. But I will hold you responsible for him. If you do warn him to change his ways, and he doesn't do anything about it, then he will perish because of his wickedness. But you will have saved your own life. Son of man, you must tell the people of Israel, you keep saying our misdeeds and transgressions are weighing us down. We are rotting away. How then shall we live? Tell them, as I, says the eternal Lord, as I live, I don't enjoy watching the wicked die. I want the wicked to stop doing what they're doing and live. Repent, turn from your wicked ways. Why would you choose to perish instead of live? People of Israel, people of Maine. How shall we live? I invite you to reflect on that question, to take a moment to decide what you are willing to commit to. We have been through this series of learnings and challenges and discoveries, and this is a good time to reflect on what actions you are willing to commit today. To ask the question, how then shall you live? And we're going to do that by sharing on a whiteboard. And maybe you've used this and maybe you haven't, but I'm going to put in the chat a link to Jamboard that is going to look just like what you see on the screen right now. And where that arrow is, beside it is a T, and that is going to get you a text box, and you can choose the color. No, not that. The blue T right below it, where the arrow is pointing. To click on that and to answer the question, I will. What are you willing to commit to today or this legislative season? So in the chat, there is a link, jamboard.google.com. I invite you to click on that. And if you can't figure that out, try. But if you can't figure that out, you can also write in the chat, I will commit to. Here are a few of the things that we are committing to. I will commit to acting with honesty, integrity, and humility, with faith as the guiding light. I will write more letters and give testimony on important occasions. I will stand for justice and speak out. I will email my legislators regularly. I will pray. I will follow legislative issues and stay in touch with my state folks. I will never give up. I will no longer hesitate or procrastinate. Instead, I will participate and educate, advocate, and legislate. I too will co-create. I will learn LD numbers. I will commit to talking honestly with others about my convictions. I will commit to joining my one voice with other voices so that none of us grows too weary to speak. I will talk with a friend about a social justice concern. I will speak the truth in love. I will keep calling and writing my local reps about bills of concerns. I will commit to contacting my legislator about my concern for racial justice. I will be present to write or speak or monitor or support all of the above. And I will remember to thank my reps for their work for all of us. These are our commitments.
How then shall we live? With this space between us, with more dismantling to do before the bridge building begins, with more gathering, more lamenting.
More hoping left to lead us, with revelations revealing all that has been continually covered up, to be ruptured and remolded, enough confidence to remain committed.
With loss in our wake and oppression in our midst, with empire and illness undoing all we erect, with the moral arc of the universe only bending as far as we bend it,
We will raise voices that are weary but not worn out, seeking newly life-giving paths and maps over death-dealing sin and status quos, listening for the growth of the still, small seeds that regularly refuse to be drowned.
how then shall we live? We will live by covenanting to not only converse, but to co-create. Breathing in enough humility to remain open, and breathing out enough confidence to remain committed.
Radically re-envisioning the call of repentance, the call of justice, the call of joy, until our longing for justice is not simply an occasional desire, but the irresistible clarion call embodied by all, every hour of every day.
Amen. Invite you to sing along with a song that you probably know, Wade in the Water. There's also a part that you probably don't know, but invite you to keep singing Wade in the Water as we commit ourselves to going out of our comfortable spaces, to be in the difficult places as we wade in the water.
God. 'Cause God is gonna trouble the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade lowly are lifted. Come out of your well-to-do places. Come meet Jesus in the struggling spaces. Come out, the kingdom of God is upon us. Come out the wilderness, follow Jesus. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Come out of your comfortable spaces. Come meet Jesus in the difficult places. Have you not heard every valley's exalted? Mountains made low, but the lowly are lifted. Come out of your well-to-do places. Come meet Jesus in the struggling spaces. Come out, the kingdom of God is upon us. Come out the wilderness, follow Jesus. Come out of your comfortable spaces. Come meet Jesus in the different places. Have you not heard every valley's exalted? Mountains made low, but the lowly are lifted. Come out of your well-to-do places. Come meet Jesus in the struggling spaces. Come out, the kingdom of God is upon us. Come out the wilderness, follow Jesus. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all of the musicians and the liturgists that you have recruited and equipped through these months of leading us in worship and prayer. Thank you. And a few thank yous as we all go our separate ways tonight. I'll share my screen so that you can join me in thanking all these good folks. First of all, a thank you to everybody who registered and attended as a participant through these 4 sessions. It is so reassuring to know that there is this circle of faith-based advocates who want to speak for justice and compassion and peace, and to make the world, as Sarah said, the way we dream it can be. I'd also like to thank everyone who has presented during one of the 4 sessions, and their names will scroll before you now. Looking at this list is an inspiration, frankly. What an incredible group of people we were privileged and honored to hear from over these past months. And a sincere thank you to each and every one of them. Go in peace, my friends. Pray as if everything depends on God, and work as if everything depends on you. Go in peace this night, and may God hold you in the palm of her hand until we meet again. Amen. I invite members of the planning committee to stay online for just a moment as folks leave the Zoom room so that we can have a moment together before we go our separate ways. Thanks to everyone for being here tonight. So thank you, Evelyn Johnson Moore. You are a saint. You have pulled this off with incredible grace and organization. It's just been such a pleasure to work with you and with everyone on this planning committee. Thank you all. Carolyn, Sarah, Mike, Alan, Marge, and Izzy, who I'm not sure if I didn't see her,
I didn't see her tonight. Yeah.
but
She did log in. I saw her log in.
Oh,
did she?
good.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
many thanks to her as well. My dog just unplugged my iPad, but it doesn't matter anymore. Doesn't matter. The sedative wore off during Wade in the Water, so we're good.
Well done, everybody. That was a ton of
Really.
work to pull off, not just one event, but 4 events. And
I know.
I think we should be very proud of what we were able to do.
Yeah.
And when I say we, I mean mostly you.
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely,
no,
Jane.
everybody
Oh, yes.
did heavy lifting on this. Well, hello, Henry.
So Jane was really excited too to think about, we plan to do it the Tuesday after Easter. And then, after, I mean, she just had this huge funeral on Saturday and also we seem to always have these like the night before our board meetings. So
Yeah.
all of that work has to happen. So, yeah, so much for my organizational ability to look and see what else is around.
Well, and the week after school vacation, when everybody was
Yeah, yeah.
just completely
Yeah.
discombobulated.
It's in the notes for 2 years from now.
Oh, good.
That's a good thing. But, these were sweet folks who joined us, really incredible groups of people. And bye, Sarah. Thank you again for your
Thanks,
worship
Sarah.
leadership.
Yes,
It was
absolutely.
inspirational. But yeah, it's nice to know this little army is equipped and ready to march, and off they go in a million different directions. And we are not alone in the work we do, which is a good thing to know. But thank you.
It would be really fun to do an email to all the people that participated in about a month or so to see what they've done. Have you written to a legislator? Just to get an idea, or also to get some feedback in terms of what do you need to learn next time that we do this.
Ooh, that's good.
Good
While it's
thinking.
still fresh,
Yes.
I think that would be really fun.
I love that idea, Marge. And when we do it in person, we have the evaluation sheet that everyone can turn in. And
Right.
I didn't even think of that in virtual land, that feedback would be so good to get.
Yeah, we could actually send that out with folks because we'll be sending out the link to the YouTube. So,
Yep, we could
Well,
even do.
and I was thinking it's almost better to do it a little further out, so that we do have an opportunity to see if someone, it'd be wonderful to hear back that, yeah, I wrote to my legislator, or I submitted some testimony, or, I tried, but I just couldn't figure it out, or whatever it is. But just to have that feedback when they've had a chance to use some of the stuff that we've worked on.
Yeah. It
I
was-
thought the 3 of you did a fantastic job too, Marge, Kush.
Yeah.
Well, actually the 4 of you, because you were also asking the questions, Jane. It just felt like I entered into this really nice conversation that you were having, and I was eavesdropping on it and on it. And I think it gave a lot of, not only just for folks who were, thinking about presenting, but also what happens afterwards. So it made it just very, very accessible.
It really.
I think
thought
it
we did well.
demystified.
I thought we did well letting Jane ask some questions.
They were so great. I wish I could have recorded yesterday's talk too.
Oh yeah, yesterday was fun.
It was so much fun. And by the way, for us chickens here, Marge is the esteemed and highly respected legislator who said it doesn't stop when you vote, it starts. That was Marge. I was quoting her back to herself.
That's good. Yeah. Well done, folks.
Yeah,
This has been
thanks,
fun.
guys.
It's been fun. It really
It
has.
has. And Evelyn, you and Carolyn and I will put our heads together soon about those thank you notes, and I'll get a list
Oh, yeah.
together to.
Yeah, once the checks are cut, I'm very happy about coming up and getting it. And then,
Okay.
hey, maybe we can go out for coffee, Carolyn. Woohoo.
Yes.
wine, either one.
wine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, wine. Forget the coffee.
How about if we all go out for wine when we can do this together?
In,
Amen.
in
Come here and
Westport,
sit on my deck.
there's these little igloos at one of the brewery restaurants in Westbrook that I drove by the other day, and there are these cute little igloos outside that you can sit in.
Oh, cool.
Very cool.
Cool.
So there are options, and more
Yeah.
and more of us are vaccinated every day. In fact, I think everyone in this room is.
Yeah.
So hot damn, it's actually legal. We can
I'm ready. I'm
wine
ready.
together.
I'm not past my 2 weeks yet, but
No.
I do have 2 shots. So
Friday. I'm on my hit my 2-week mark Friday. So soon enough, Alan, soon enough. But
soon enough.
you all go put your feet up, pat yourselves on the back. Great job.
And we'll see you all tomorrow morning.
And I'll
See
see
you
you
in the
tomorrow
morning.
at 9 o'clock. Oh dear God, what were we?
Yeah,
Need
with
to
a cup
open
of
that
coffee.
email.
It'll be coffee tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go have a glass of wine right now.
good idea.
Or hold my
idea.
beer, right?
Hold my beer. Oh my God, I love
You
it.
know what? A coffee mug hides anything that you want to put in it. So
There
That's
you
right.
go.
This is true.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
you guys have to guess.
But 10 o'clock in the morning, I don't know. It's like eating chocolate at 10 o'clock. At noon, I could do it, but at 10,
Oh, I can't do that in the morning. No, it's always coffee in the morning. Trust me. Always coffee.
Oh, methinks she doth protest too much.
a wink, wink.
Coffee.
All right, see you guys.
Whatever.
Nice.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Wow.
Good night. Good night.